What's up, you guys, and welcome to this video on people development for nonprofit leaders. We're talking about your staff, your board, and your volunteers. I'm Tristan Griffin, and I'm going to walk you through the basics of people development for your nonprofit organization. So let's start with this. The people you allow into your organization can either be a big help, right, an addition of time, energy, and resources, or a big hindrance, which is a waste of time, energy, and resources for your organization. So let me give you an example. When I first started in nonprofit work, I was tasked with building a board. And I worked for a large nonprofit, so this wasn't the governance board, but it was a local advisory board. The intention behind this type of board is to gather a group of dedicated volunteers to help serve the mission and push it forward within the community. And as I started building this board, I invited anyone and everyone to join the board, right? All I knew at the time was that I needed help. So I was very liberal with my invitations. And as you can imagine, this resulted in a board full of people who weren't the right fit for my organization. I had written board expectations that I provided to each board member, but they were based off expectations created by someone else within the organization, and they were unclear and they were very low, right? They weren't the expectations I had in my head for my board. Beyond that, I didn't take the time to dive deep into these expectations with board members prior to making any decisions about them joining the board. I emailed to them, assumed that they read them, and then moved forward with adding them to the board. And can you see where I'm going with this, right? I spent my first 3 years or so in nonprofit work frustrated with my board. I felt like they didn't do any substantial work for the organization, and beyond that, I felt like board meetings were more of a waste of my time than a benefit to me. I'd walk away from board meetings discouraged with a task list a mile long. And I felt like I was doing everything for the organization and reporting to people who did nothing to very little for the organization. And at about the 3-year mark, I decided to take the expectations I had in my head and put them onto paper, right? And I set a high standard. And then I presented these expectations to my board. And within the next 6 months, I lost 7 board members. And while that sounds awful, it was the best thing that ever happened to my board. I was left with 3 board members who were bought in. They were all in. And we dropped the other board members who were weighing us down. Before you get the wrong impression, let me say that I was the reason those board members were weighing us down. I didn't have clear expectations, and I added board members who weren't the right fit for the board. I didn't train them well. I didn't educate them well. And overall, I did a poor job in setting them up for success as board members. And as time went on, I became crystal clear on my expectations, and I held my board members accountable to those expectations without fail. I knew how important that was for the overall health of not only the organization, but also myself. I expected a lot of board members. In essence, I expected them to live up to the standard of excellence that I would live up to if I had been asked to be on a similar board for a similar organization. I didn't let them get away with anything I wouldn't do if I were in their shoes. And this resulted in a first-class, highly motivated board. Board meetings became fun again. We accomplished our goals, and everyone was excited to be a part of the organization. And now let's take a look at the framework I use for people development within my nonprofit endeavors. This framework applies to board members just as much as it applies to staff members and volunteers. The first piece of that framework, and the most important piece of the framework, is culture. There's nothing more important for your organization than culture. And by culture, I mean the values upon which the people within your organization truly operate, right? Truly, because the values upon which the people within your organization say they operate, or the values upon which they want to operate, are not the values upon which they truly operate. So you must monitor the values upon which the people within your organization truly operate and set standards of excellence upon which they should operate. If true activities fall below that standard, you must correct them. If they cannot be corrected, you must remove the offender or adjust your standards of excellence. Of course, with all of this said, you must understand that the culture of your organization is set primarily by the person at the top. And if that's you, you have to meet your own standards of excellence. And if you don't, neither will anyone else within your organization, except for the rare soul who lives up to his or her own standard of excellence. And that person will eventually tire of being the only one living up to a standard of excellence within your organization, and they'll leave the organization, right? And here's an example of what it looks like to live up to your own standard of excellence. When I was a college football coach prior to my nonprofit days, it was one of my standards of excellence for my players to clean up the equipment they used on the practice field once practice was over. And in order to show them how serious I was about this standard, I also stayed after practice to clean up the equipment they used, right? I didn't want anyone to think that they could get away with skipping out on this activity. And the more you, as a nonprofit leader, allow someone to be exempted from your standards of excellence, the more you will demotivate your best people and erode their respect for you as a leader. And here's another example. Again, as a college football coach, we had a player on the team who was allowed to get away with nearly anything. The head coach did not hold him accountable, but he was one of the laziest and most arrogant players on the team. And over time, this demotivated the players who were the greatest assets to our team from a cultural standpoint and made them lose respect for our head coach. Right? Culture drives performance. Teams with incredible culture will outperform teams with mediocre culture all day, every day. Set high standards, promote the standards all the time, reward those who are living up to the standards, and hold those who aren't living up to the standards accountable, and you'll find success. The second part of my people development framework is expectations, right? And that goes hand in hand with culture. Early on in my nonprofit career, I had expectations of people who got involved with my organization, but those expectations often remained in my head, right? I couldn't understand why they kept underperforming, and I kept getting frustrated by their underperformance. Right? Clarity is the lifeblood of a nonprofit organization. Where there's a lack of clarity, there's a lack of quality execution. And learning how to communicate with great clarity is a difficult task, but one that will pay dividends for the nonprofit leader over and over. So here are some things to understand about clarity. It often takes saying something multiple times and in multiple different ways before enough clarity is provided for two human beings to be on the same page, right? Assume nothing. Even if you're 99% certain that you and someone else are on the same page, say it one more time to make sure everything is clear. And lastly, write down your expectations. There are two primary benefits to this. First, the process of writing down your expectations forces you to work through your expectations and clarify them for yourself. Of course, the clearer you become on your expectations, the more you can communicate them with greater clarity to others. And second, the written word gives the reader an opportunity to, one, digest your expectations in multiple ways, right? Orally and the written word, assuming you're sharing your expectations orally as well. And it gives them the opportunity also, number two, to slowly digest your expectations, right? To process them, to take them in. And number three, to read them multiple times if they don't understand them, right? When it comes to setting expectations for people who are deeply involved in your nonprofit, right? Your board, your staff members, set your expectations high. The temptation in nonprofit work is to lower your expectations simply because you need the help. Don't do that, right? You'll regret it every time. I recommend you set your expectations at the level that you'd perform if you were involved with another nonprofit in a similar role, right? For example, if you were a board member for a nonprofit that's similar to yours, how would you act? What would you do? Would you donate to the organization? Would you respond to the emails of staff? Would you show up to events? Hold others to this same standard within your nonprofit and don't lower the standard. And the third part of this process is vetting, right? Vet. In my nonprofit days, I made sure that people who got involved with my organization on a high level had to work through multiple meetings and many sets of eyes before we gave them the green light to get involved. Of course, I learned this lesson the hard way, right? Early on, I added any and everyone to my nonprofit board. If they had a pulse and they were interested, I signed them up, right? Which was a big mistake. And what I ended up with was 10 board members who were all moderately passionate about my cause. Of course, on top of that, I didn't provide them with clear expectations and I didn't train them well, which was a recipe for disaster. And eventually, again, I became crystal clear on my expectations and presented those to the board, which caused 7 of the 10 board members to leave within the next 6 months. But this was a great step forward for me. It's far better to run with 3 of the right people than 10 of the wrong people. And I'll give you an example of one of my vetting processes. To join the board of my nonprofit, an interested person would have to, number 1, attend a meeting with me where we read and talked through the board expectations. Number 2, they'd have to attend a meeting with me and my board chair to talk through the expectations once more and to allow my board chair to share his perspective or her perspective on board involvement and to get my board chair's eyes on the person. And then number 3, that person would have to attend a board meeting so the entire board could meet the person and provide their opinion before we came to a decision. And we still got it wrong sometimes, right? But we got it wrong far less because of crystal clear expectations and a quality vetting process. The fourth piece of my people development framework is onboarding and training, right? Onboarding and training often go out the window when a nonprofit staff gets busy. We think, they'll figure it out, right? And we throw our new staff person or volunteer to the wolves. And this is a short-term corner cut that will always create a long-term hassle. It might go okay for a while, but 3, 6, or 9 months in, issues will start to arise, and those issues will be more time consuming than if you'd simply provided quality training and onboarding on the front end. Right? It's best to systematize your onboarding and training. Otherwise, it feels like a heavy lift for the supervisor every time he or she has to gear up to reinvent the wheel once more to make sure someone is adequately trained. Make it into a checklist to make sure you hit all the right stuff in your onboarding and training process, and so that you have that checklist when it comes time to do it, right? Instead of trying to reinvent the checklist every single time. Okay, the fifth part of my people development framework is delegation, right? Delegate good times. Come on, right? Cool in the gang. Anyone? Early on in my nonprofit career, I wasn't a great delegator, mostly because one, I was worried that I'd be burdening people by passing on tasks to them. And two, I didn't understand how to help people do what they loved within the context of my nonprofit. So let me explain both of these challenges, right? Number one, first, I was worried that I'd be burdening people by passing tasks to them. In other words, these people had told me that they were willing to help, and then I worried about asking them to do too much. I have two things to say about this. Number one, let other people set their own boundaries. Of course, you don't want to pester or pressure them, but never be afraid to put an opportunity in front of someone. If they don't want to do it, they can say no. This same concept applies to fundraising and financial asks, right? Never be afraid to ask someone to help, and never say their no for them. Give them the opportunity and let them be the grown-up, mature adult who is in charge of their own yeses and own nos, unless you're asking children to donate, right? Interesting tactic if so. But seriously, this is a principle that goes far beyond nonprofit management into all of life. Put it out there and see what happens. Know where you end and the other person begins. It's not your job to protect them from doing too much. It's their job. Dignify and respect them by allowing them to keep and utilize that power rather than you trying to guess for them. Number two, people love to help. Nonprofit leaders often spend so much of their time helping others that they forget that people who aren't in the nonprofit world don't always receive as many opportunities to help. Most people are thirsting for an opportunity to make a meaningful impact, and when you withhold your request from them, you rob them of an opportunity to contribute to society in a meaningful way. Okay, and number two, right next, I didn't understand how to help people do what they loved within the context of my nonprofit, right? This was an obstacle to delegation for me. My method of delegation on the front end was one, identify a task that needed to be done, and two, ask a random volunteer to do it. And this is a recipe for volunteers who lack passion, enthusiasm, and motivation. But when I dove within myself and began to ask the question, what lights my fire? And as I asked this question and began to spend more time within my nonprofit accomplishing tasks that lit my fire, I noticed a big increase in my own passion, enthusiasm, and motivation, and that's when it all clicked for me with respect to delegation. My delegation method had to shift from identifying a task that needed to be done and asking a random volunteer to do it to, number one, understand what lights my volunteers' fire within the context of my nonprofit, and number two, provide them with everything they need to accomplish the tasks that light their fire within the context of my nonprofit. So I'll give you an example. Event planning is not in my 20%, right? Speaking of the focus minimization portion of my framework. In other words, event planning doesn't light my fire. I can do it, but it's not what gets me out of bed in the morning. However, at one point in my nonprofit career, I had a board member who loved event planning, and she was better at it than me. So in year one, I had her shadow me on our biggest event of the year, and in year two, she took the event over, right? And she crushed it. The solution was simple. Rather than asking her to do the accounting for the nonprofit, right, which also needed done, I took the time to find out what she was passionate about, and then I plugged her into a role that would help her live in her passion within the context of my nonprofit. And this not only took a huge task off my plate, but it made her passion for the organization grow even more. She was the first to tell people about how great the organization was because she was living in her passion. And lastly, with respect to delegation, another important piece of delegation is to always help those to whom you delegate tasks see how their contribution connects to the bigger mission, right? Never cease to remind them of this. It's easy, even when you're the person doing the job, right? Even if you're the director or whatever, it's easy to lose that vision of how each small task is connected to the larger mission. And so remind them of this constantly. This applies even if the task is taking out the trash, right? Everything that is accomplished for your organization contributes to the overall mission. Don't let a volunteer take their role lightly, no matter what it is. Okay, and the next step in my framework for people development is accountability, right? Expectations are of no value if you don't hold people accountable to them. And before I was a nonprofit leader, like I said, I was a college football coach. And again, in my coaching days, I worked for a head coach who always spoke of the team's core values, but rarely held people accountable to those values. In particular, he let the quarterback get away with violating the values, right? And this was a big challenge for the overall culture of the team. First of all, posting values or expectations and then not holding people accountable to them creates confusion. Right? People aren't sure if they're doing well or poorly, and they aren't sure what activities are acceptable and what activities aren't. And this causes hesitancy, which causes delayed response times. For example, if I'm not sure whether something is okay, I might question doing it many times before actually doing it. And when efficiency is important, right, as it can be on a fast-paced football field or in a task-heavy nonprofit, it's important that everyone is on the same page and can execute quickly when it's time to do so. And second, a failure to hold people accountable to expectations dissolves trust. To say that you're about something and then not to be about it makes people lose trust in you. They wonder what other corners you're cutting and what else you're lying to them about. Of course, within the organization, trust is the primary currency. When trust erodes, an organization is in big trouble, right? And then just thinking about accountability sessions as a whole, right? They don't have to be guilt-laden or shame-based, right? They can be loving communications where two parties are focused on serving the organization and the people the organization serves by becoming clear on whether each is meeting expectations, right? Expectations are there for a reason. They let people know when they're a good fit for the organization and when they're not. They also let us know when there are problems to solve. For example, perhaps the person who is not living up to expectations simply needs more training in a particular area. It usually takes a conversation to truly understand what problems need to be solved, and I'd recommend hosting review meetings on a minimum of a yearly basis with quarterly check-ins for your high-level volunteers and staff. Now, the last piece of my people development framework is knowing when to let someone go, right? And this task has been built up so much in the collective consciousness of humanity as a bad thing, right? And I want to push back on that for a moment. Again, we utilize expectations to decipher when someone is a good fit for the organization. And if they can't live up to expectations, then they're not a good fit, right? Assuming we've done our part to provide them with all the tools and resources necessary to do the job. And it's as simple as that. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Although it can be uncomfortable at times, I see letting someone go as a very loving action, and here's why. Letting someone go sets them free. When they're involved with an organization for which they are the wrong fit, they're not only wasting your time, but they're wasting their own time. They're wasting their time on activities that don't excite them enough for them to give it their all, right? Or they're wasting their time on activities that they're simply not that good at. Instead, they could be doing something they love so much that they meet all the expectations of the organization and that they're so good at that they make an incredible impact. Does that make sense? For example, if Johnny can't show up to board meetings on time and respond to emails of nonprofit staff, he's probably not that excited about the mission. He might think that he is, but he's not. Set him free to find a mission that excites him so much that he shows up to board meetings 5 minutes early and responds to everything that comes his way. Right? Do you see how setting them free is a loving action? To truly take the time to discern that a person is not a good fit for the organization and to set them free to go find something else for which they are the right fit is an incredibly kind action, right? Okay, if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, follow, or subscribe. All of those actions help me reach more people with this message. And if you haven't already done so, join the Nonprofit Growth Mastery group that I run on Facebook. It contains other resources similar to this to help nonprofit leaders thrive and create thriving nonprofits. And lastly, if you're interested in diving deeper into people development and truly making a genuine, lasting, substantial progress in this realm and many others that are absolutely necessary for your success in the nonprofit space, check out my online course. You can find more information about this on our website under the Our Products section. This product is called the Boom Package, which includes the online course, coaching from me, and an online community of nonprofit leaders who are traveling the same path as you, understand you, and can provide you with wisdom and encouragement as you seek to make your nonprofit dreams a reality. Otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service. Take care, friend.